Hey, Tim Frisch with A Frisch Perspective, your Christian nerd bringing you analysis, reviews, and fun. In this video, I want to compare John MacArthur versus Greg Laurie's response to the California government's restrictions on churches. I saw an article from Christianity Today, and it was talking about how both Grace Community Church, where John MacArthur pastors, and Harvest Christian Fellowship, where Greg Laurie is the pastor, both conducted services in California, but took two different approaches in regard to the California government's restrictions on church gatherings. So I thought it would be interesting because I have been talking about John MacArthur and Grace Community Church's stance to see how Greg Laurie and his church is approaching this issue. And this article really brings out some differences here, so we'll take a look at it a little bit. Part of the article does talk about how Grace Community Church has chosen to essentially disregard the restrictions and just meet as normal, pretty much. I mean, they do make things available to their congregants for safety purposes, but generally they're not putting restrictions on their congregants, as I understand it. They're just allowing people to come and to conduct themselves in the way that they personally choose to. Greg Laurie and Harvest Christian Fellowship are trying more to follow the government guidelines by meeting outdoors in a tent and practicing social distancing. So they're trying more to follow the government regulations in how they're conducting their services. So what we're seeing here really are two different approaches, and I want to focus just on part of this article here. It's titled, How Two California Megachurches Kept Worshiping. John MacArthur takes a stand against regulations, while Greg Laurie finds creative ways to comply. The article says, Laurie, whose church borrowed a giant tent from evangelist Nick V. for its recent worship setup, sees the outdoor setting as our newest response to keeping people safe in California. We don't have to be in the sun, and we were easily able to sit in distanced seating groups and still feel like one big happy family, Laurie told CT. Signs at the service acknowledged the change with an upbeat attitude. Same church, fresh message, new experience. Laurie, 67, has seen the bright side of the pandemic adjustments from the start. He celebrated spiritual awakening that took place online as more viewers accessed his sermon live streams. One of those was President Donald Trump, and Harvest received an additional bump in viewers as Trump tweeted that he watched the Palm Sunday service. Laurie belongs to the president's Evangelical Advisory Board. To date, Harvest has received 80,000 online professions of faith and has sent Bibles to a quarter of the new believers that joined online. Laurie shares concerns about closed churches with fellow evangelicals. He said he believes the local church cannot be replaced by online worship, and he fears government overreach in regulating worship during the pandemic. However, he has also spoken out against downplaying the impact of the virus. I'll be honest with you, Laurie told the Los Angeles Times in April. One of the things that kind of irritates me is the way some people are not really responding appropriately to the very real threat of the coronavirus. Sometimes people are just ignoring it as though this has not been asked of us, and I think we want to be considerate of others. Fellow Southern California pastors have suggested that whether leaders see the coronavirus as a continued threat often determines the level of precautions they will take around meeting. The outlook has become increasingly politicized, with Trump supporters half as likely as detractors to say they are concerned about rates of infection and death from the virus. So I really liked how this article brings out the contrast of these two approaches, two outlooks on this situation. And it is making the point, as we were just reading here, that a lot of this comes down to how serious people perceive the threat of the virus to be. I've talked about this before. One of the big problems that we're facing, though, is that with this virus pandemic situation, there really are mixed messages coming at us. I don't know if you feel that way, but I feel that way. Even John MacArthur, at the beginning of the pandemic, he talks about how at that time it made sense for churches to close out of precaution, out of safety measures. Now, there are some people who feel that the situation is just as dangerous now as it was back in the spring. So even with MacArthur's position, there are some people who would say, well, MacArthur was right when he closed the church, and he should still be doing that because the situation is just as dangerous. Other people clearly feel that the situation is not really that great of a threat. What is challenging from my perspective are the mixed messages that we receive about the situation. So, for example, I was actually listening to Ted Cruz this morning. He was talking about, I think yesterday, getting on Air Force One with various other people to travel with the president. And it was interesting, as he was talking about that, he said that they all had to be tested for coronavirus, and some of the people were unable to get on Air Force One because they tested positive. And it was interesting what he said in relation to this. He said, it remains a dangerous disease, and we have to continue to take serious steps to limit its spread. So that's what this conservative politician Ted Cruz said, that it is a dangerous disease, and we have to take serious steps to limit the spread of this disease. That to me sounds like something we need to take seriously. At the same time, he also is talking about trying to reopen the economy, move forward, and make progress in the workforce. And so he has also an optimistic outlook here. And I just feel like when we're looking at the data, there are a lot of different opinions, and we get these mixed messages. On one hand, some people look at the data and say, it's not really that serious. It's not like you're very likely to die. Other people are saying, yeah, but it's spreading more and more rapidly, and there is going to be a lot more death. It is really serious. So this is a big question that comes up all the time, is how serious is the threat of this pandemic? It is something that we just haven't fully come to consensus on. I do think that we can all agree that there is some sort of a threat here. Some people may not think so, but I think most people could agree, yeah, there has been a lot of death. And yes, of course, people are very suspicious of some of the numbers that are coming out, but there has been death as a result of this pandemic. I heard a nurse talking the other day, and she sounds like she wants everything now to get more back to normal, but she said that at the beginning when she was in the ICU, it really was bad. And it is possible that things could get really bad again as the temperatures get colder and maybe people are more susceptible to catching the disease or have compromised immune systems. Maybe the situation could get serious. So the point I'm making is there is possibly a threat here, but it's really hard to determine how serious the threat actually is. But I'll also say this, that even if we agreed on the numbers, which we don't, but even if we did really agree on those numbers, I think we would still have different perceptions of the risk level. One of the reasons I say that is because I know from my own experience that if you have personally experienced something bad, or you know someone you care about has experienced something bad, then you tend to see it as a greater risk. I remember driving a motorcycle when I was younger, and I turned onto a driveway that had a lot of gravel, and the motorcycle came out from under me, and I fell down, and I scraped myself up pretty bad. Now, it wasn't the worst accident in the world, but it did shake me up, and I can tell you that after that experience, for a while, I felt a greater risk getting on a motorcycle because of that bad experience. Some people have had very bad experiences during this pandemic where they have had loved ones who have been seriously ill and even died. So their perception of the risk is going to be high. And we have to acknowledge that regardless of what the numbers say, our perceptions are going to be influenced by our experiences. And because we're talking about perception rather than just numbers, it always complicates the issue. And I think that speaks into what we're talking about here, that on one hand you have one pastor who says, yes, we should take this risk very seriously, we're going to follow government guidelines. Another pastor saying, no, we don't think the risk is that serious. Now, I know there's more to the situation than that. You also have at play here how you look at the government and what you see as the government's role. That is definitely an issue as well. But there's no doubt about it that the level of risk, because remember, John MacArthur and the elders at Grace Community did close the church down at first when it was a perceived great risk. So that clearly makes the case for closing church if the risk is high. I think even Pastor MacArthur has given evidence of that. But he clearly has said he doesn't think that the risk merits the action being taken. Pastors like Greg Laurie have a different stance, and clearly they think we need to be careful. Ultimately, we do have to make choices based on the best information that we have at our disposal, but it's very difficult. And so in saying all of this, I just wanted to share that this is another way that churches are approaching the situation, and hopefully we will come to greater and greater consensus as a culture, as a society, on what the actual risk is. Hopefully we'll all be wise, gracious, but also stand by what we truly believe. Those are some of my thoughts on it. I would love to hear what you think in the comments below. But remember to keep the conversation positive and edifying. And as always, thank you so much for listening to what I have to say from a Frisch Perspective.